Today we will cover two dangerous cave expeditions. In the first story, a father's moment of hesitation turned into a life-or-death struggle for his children. And in the second story, despite receiving clear warnings, the cavers ventured into the Overholt-blowing cave, their overconfidence pushing them to risk everything in a place where one wrong move could mean no return. Watch till the end, and as always, viewer discretion is advised.
October 31st, 2004. Sarge Jimenez stood outside his home, sharpening his machete. His sons, 11-year-old Pascual and 6-year-old Miguel, watched closely. Pascual had hunted before, but for Miguel, this was his first time. Their village, Yoquib, was struggling. The harvest had failed, and meat was scarce. Tepezcuintles, large rodents known for their tender meat, often hid in the caves nearby. One of those caves, simply called La Cueva, sat just beyond their cornfield. Jimenez had a plan passed down through generations. The boys would enter through the large opening, make noise, and push any animals toward the second exit where Jimenez would be waiting. They had no flashlights, just pine torches that burned fast. As the sun dipped, they moved out. The entrance stood 5 feet high, thick with roots and vines. Jimenez gave his final instructions: stay close, head toward the second entrance's light, and keep moving. He'd meet them on the other side. 20 minutes in and out. The boys stepped into the cave. Jimenez vanished into the trees. Inside, the passage tightened fast, forcing them to crouch. Then it opened into a chamber about 20 feet wide, the ceiling rising to 10 feet. Across the room, a dim glow marked the second entrance, where their father waited. The boys clapped and shouted, their voices echoing through the chamber. A flash of movement, a Tepezcuintle darted along the wall. About 22 pounds, it raced straight toward the second exit, right on cue. Outside, Jimenez tensed. He gripped his machete, watching the entrance. The animal burst through the vines. He swung, steel met fur, but the strike was off. Wounded, the Tepezcuintle squealed and vanished back into the cave. Jimenez cursed under his breath. Losing a wounded animal wasn't an option. He called out to his sons, telling them what had happened. They needed to finish the job, both for the meat and to end the animal's suffering. 6-year-old Miguel didn't hesitate. He offered to go after it. Before Jimenez could respond, the boy turned and ran back into the cave. Pascual stayed behind, thinking his brother would be right back. But minutes dragged on. Miguel followed the blood trail deeper, past the main chamber. The animal, in pain and panic, had crawled into a tight side tunnel, barely 2 feet wide, and Miguel, unaware of what lay ahead, followed it inside. When Miguel didn't come out, worry set in fast. Jimenez handed Pascual a fresh torch and sent him in to find his brother. The daylight outside was almost gone, and a knot of fear began to tighten in Jimenez's chest. Pascual entered the cave, calling Miguel's name as he moved deeper. He followed the main chamber to the back, where he spotted the narrow side tunnel. Miguel's small footprints trailed into the cramped space. Pascual dropped to his hands and knees and crawled in after him. After crawling about 10 feet, the ceiling dropped even lower. Now flat on his belly, Pascual kept going. 20 feet in, he finally heard Miguel's voice. The passage bent sharply left, then right, sloping downward. Pascual pressed on, determined to reach his brother. But time kept ticking. Neither boy returned. Night fully fell. With no other option, Jimenez entered the cave himself, navigating to the main chamber by memory. His voice echoed in the silence, no answer. Then he found it, the narrow crawl space with fresh prints leading inside. He tried to follow, but his broad shoulders stopped him barely a meter in. He shouted their names again. This time, faint voices called back from deep in the tunnel. He couldn't see them, he couldn't reach them, but he knew they were alive. Panicked, Jimenez rushed back to the village of Yoquib, waking neighbors and relatives. By midnight, a dozen men with torches had gathered at the cave entrance. One by one, they tried entering the crawl space, but none could squeeze past the first sharp turn. They could hear the boys, tired, frightened, but still calling. Somewhere deep inside that tunnel, likely stuck, was Miguel. Maybe both boys were now trapped. No one knew how deep the passage went or how narrow it became. But what came next would reveal just how dangerously complex this cave really was. The first 24 hours blurred into one long stretch of desperation. Men clawed at the narrow passage with their bare hands, digging feverishly to widen the opening, inch by agonizing inch. Women from the village came and went, quietly bringing food and water for the rescuers. But Jimenez didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He just sat, eyes locked on the black mouth of the cave that had swallowed his sons. By day 2, the story had spread to nearby villages. Dozens more arrived carrying tools, shovels, picks, hammers, anything that might help. The air grew heavy with tension. Every now and then, a faint sound drifted out from deep within the tunnel, just enough to confirm the boys were still alive. Rescuers extended bamboo tubes into the passage, hoping some water would reach the children. Whether it actually did, no one could be sure.
Inside, time had stopped for Miguel and Pascual. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs. The cold cut through their tiny bodies. Darkness pressed in from all sides. The narrow tunnel offered no room to turn, no space to breathe freely. Trapped in this nightmare, at just 6 and 11 years old, the boys drifted between exhaustion and silence, barely able to respond to the calls from above. Later that same day, municipal authorities finally arrived. With them came more powerful tools, battery-powered lamps, a small gasoline generator, and electric drills. Rescue efforts now stretched day and night, but despite the noise and effort, progress remained painfully slow. Crowds gathered around the entrance. Some came to help, others came to watch. Tensions boiled over. Family members begged rescuers to dig faster. Officials urged caution. Tempers flared. A man from a nearby village shouted that the authorities weren't doing enough. But Jimenez said nothing. He just stood there, silent, hollow-eyed, clinging to hope.
By the third day, rescuers had widened the passage enough to reach a sharp 90-degree bend about 6 meters in. The space beyond was even tighter, too small for anyone but a petite woman on the team. She weighed barely 45 kilos and stood just 1.5 meters tall. With a light strapped to her head and a bottle of water and food pushed ahead of her, she crawled into the narrow gap. She squeezed another 4.7 meters in before hitting a second sharp turn, this one even more constricted. She stopped. The boys were alive. She could hear them on the other side. She couldn't reach them, but the gap was just wide enough to pass water and food through. When she came back out, covered in dirt and her clothes torn, she told the team what they'd hoped to hear. The boys were still there, still holding on. That news sparked a surge of energy. More volunteers arrived, tools poured in. Officials called for help from the state. A medical team set up camp at the entrance, everyone prepared for the moment the boys would be pulled out. Jimenez, exhausted, finally accepted some water and tortillas. His sons were close. But things took a turn. As night fell, clouds rolled in over the Chiapas Mountains. October's dry stretch had ended. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady, then relentless. By midnight, it was a downpour. Water raced across the land, heading straight for the cave. Rescuers first felt it at their feet, a slow trickle that quickly became a forceful stream. Urgency surged. They had cleared the first constriction, making progress, but another 4.7 meters remained, including the tightest sections. The sound of rushing water soon drowned everything. Shouts echoed as the flow intensified. Those near the entrance were pushed back by the rising flood. Jimenez rushed forward, knowing his sons wouldn't survive if the water reached them. Rescue teams scrambled. They built makeshift barriers from earth and stone, digging trenches, trying to direct the water away from the cave entrance. Anything to buy time. But nature didn't yield. Water tore through the cave, flooding every tunnel, including the narrow side tunnel where the boys waited. Horrified, rescuers stood frozen. Some watched, powerless. Others fought the rising tide, refusing to give up. By the fourth morning, the lower cave was completely underwater. The narrow side tunnel, where the boys were trapped, was now a silent, flooded grave. Jimenez had to be restrained as he tried to force his way inside. He collapsed at the entrance, his cries swallowed by the roar of rushing water. Rain pounded for 2 more days. The boys' chances were nearly zero. The site turned into chaos, mud everywhere, hope slipping away. Villagers blamed officials for delays. Officials pointed to the weather and rugged terrain. Rescuers clashed over what could have been done differently.
But none of it stopped the flood that now swallowed the cave, and all hope with it. When the rain finally stopped, the waters began to recede. State officials brought pumps to clear the cave faster. But what they found was unrecognizable: mud-filled tunnels, collapsed walls, and new rock formations. For a week, rescuers kept digging, clearing debris and pushing through caved-in sections. They reached the spot where a woman had once heard the boys' voices, but found nothing. Deeper in, the tunnel dropped 30 meters into a flooded shaft that disappeared into darkness. It might stretch for hundreds of feet. No one knew where it led. After 10 days, officials called off the search. They believed the flood had swept the boys' bodies deeper into the cave system, far beyond reach. No remains were ever recovered. Yet even after the rescue teams left, some villagers kept looking, driven by grief, mistrust, and the need for answers. But the mountain gave up nothing. The official report listed drowning as the cause of death, but questions lingered. Why had the boys gone so deep into such a tight, dangerous passage? Did Miguel get stuck chasing the animal, with Pascual staying behind to help? Or did a hidden collapse trap them before the rains came? No one would ever know for sure. The Tepezcuintle, the creature that started it all, vanished too. Maybe it slipped deeper into the cave. Maybe it died in some unreachable pocket of stone. Like the boys, it became a part of the mountain's silence. Jimenez was never the same. The man who once called the cave his second home never entered it again.
On February 25, 1967, two friends, Ralph Bucca and John Locke, entered Overholt Blowing Cave in the biting cold of afternoon. This Overholt Blowing Cave rescue would go down as one of the most chilling hypothermia survival stories in caving history. Layered in long-sleeve shirts, jackets, and outer suits, they believed they were ready for the challenge ahead. Many real-life cave survival stories begin with similar confidence, but nature often has other plans. Before going in, they spoke with the cave's owner, G. Dallas McKeever. He warned them about the dangers: freezing water, brutal temperatures, and how quickly exhaustion could set in. He didn't stop them, but he made it clear the risks were real. The dangers of caving, especially in places like Daredevil's Passage, are a harsh reality for explorers. Ralph and John were undeterred. Confident in their insulated gear, they brushed off the warnings. To them, the cave was an adventure, not a threat. But that confidence wouldn't last long. Inside, the reality was far colder and far deadlier than they had imagined. This is a classic case of caving tragedy turning adventure into a survival nightmare. As they descended deeper, the cave's icy grip tightened. Cold streams cut through the rock and damp air pressed against them. Their headlamps lit narrow beams across the glistening walls as they moved through the quiet, broken only by their breath and the splash of water beneath their boots. Such scenes are typical in real cave expeditions, especially in hypothermic environments. About 30 minutes in, they reached Daredevil's Passage, a 500-foot crawl through near-freezing water, infamous even in good conditions. The moment Ralph entered, the cold hit hard. Water soaked through his layers, clinging to his skin, draining his body heat with every inch forward. Daredevil's Passage is notorious among cave explorers, often cited in cave survival documentaries and rescue accounts. John led the way, moving carefully and calling back to check on Ralph. But by the time they reached the mountain room, Ralph was in trouble. He flexed his fingers, trying to bring back feeling, but his hands stayed numb. His legs were stiff, barely responding. The cold was winning. This is where signs of severe hypothermia in cave environments begin to manifest, making rescue difficult. "We need to turn back," John said, watching Ralph struggle to keep pace. Ralph nodded, pride giving way to the cold reality closing in. In many real caving survival stories, that moment of turning back becomes a fight against time. The way back was brutal. Daredevil's Passage felt longer, colder, tighter. Ralph's body was failing, each movement slower, each breath shorter.
The cold was inside him now, sapping his strength inch by inch. Cave rescues involving tight, freezing crawls are some of the most dangerous missions in speleology. Halfway through, Ralph collapsed onto the wet ground. His hands shook uncontrollably. John dropped beside him, panic rising. "Come on, Ralph, we're close," he said, trying to lift him. But Ralph's legs gave out. He slipped back into the freezing water, unable to stand. Moments like these highlight the real risks of hypothermia during cave exploration gone wrong. What was once a place of curiosity had turned into a merciless trap. John knew he had no time to waste. Dragging Ralph's limp body through the narrow crawl was agonizing, his own strength fading fast, every muscle burning with exhaustion. The cold gnawed at them like a predator, draining the last reserves of energy and will. Ralph's head lolled to one side. His face was pale, lips tinged blue. When his eyes slipped shut, John froze. Was he still breathing? "Stay with me, Ralph," he pleaded, shaking him gently. A faint groan answered back. It was enough. In cave rescue scenarios, even the faintest sign of life offers a glimmer of hope, just enough to keep pushing. Fueled by desperation, John pushed through the final stretch of Daredevil's Passage. Each movement was a fight against the cave itself. When they finally broke into the main passage near the entrance, John's hands were scraped raw, his body shaking uncontrollably. But Ralph was fading fast. His skin had turned ashen. His breaths were shallow and weak. His body had gone rigid, a terrifying sign that hypothermia had taken hold. This terrifying overhope-blowing cave story has become a prime example of cold cave survival told in underground exploration circles. John knew time was slipping away. With every ounce of strength left in him, he half-dragged, half-carried Ralph toward the faint glimmer of the entrance ahead. The cold night hit them like a wall as they stumbled out of the cave. Gasping for air, John rushed Ralph into the nearby shed, urgently stripping off his soaked clothes and replacing them with dry ones. In hypothermia rescue protocol, rapid rewarming and dry clothing are critical first responses.
The shed's small stove flickered with weak heat, barely enough to combat the deep chill that had sunk into Ralph's body. His pulse was faint, irregular. John rubbed his limbs fiercely, trying to coax warmth back into them, but Ralph didn't respond. Panic gripped him. He couldn't do this alone. Emergency cave rescue efforts often depend on fast, improvised care before paramedics arrive. He bolted out into the night and found McKever, who wasted no time and ran back with him to the shed. Working together, they lifted Ralph and hurried him to the house, every movement driven by raw urgency. Teamwork often becomes the key difference between life and death in stories of survival in caves. Inside, they sprang into action. McKever set pots of water to boil, while John continued rubbing Ralph's limbs, his hands trembling. Steam rose from the hot compresses, but Ralph was fading fast. His breathing had become barely audible, his body slipping further toward the edge. This intense hypothermia story in a real cave highlights how quick thinking can reverse even dire situations. It took 2 agonizing hours before Ralph stirred, his eyes finally opening to the soft glow of the room. Bit by bit, his body began to recover from the brutal ordeal. He had been minutes from death, saved only by John's unwavering resolve and the tireless efforts to keep him alive. Survival stories like Ralph's are powerful reminders of human resilience and determination under extreme cave conditions. The cave had pushed them to the brink, a ruthless reminder of nature's indifference and how thin the line is between survival and tragedy.